Say you're walking through the park one day, it's a beautiful summer's day, you're feeling wonderful. Then a pit bull breaks loose from its owner, rushes over to you with mouth open, fangs dripping with saliva, just barking. Suddenly, your whole day shifts. You're going to move into fight or flight, and you're going to react to this threat from the outside. So your body is translating this external stimulus of the pit bull into internal biochemical molecular messengers, and those are going throughout your whole body, and they're pushing you into stress not in 20 seconds. Those genes reach peak expression in under 3 seconds. So now your body's flooded with adrenaline, flooded with cortisol very, very quickly, and you're then responding to that threat. That's the way the stress response is meant to work. Our ancestors survived because they had a hair-trigger stress response. And in any ancient tribe, 500,000 years ago, those people with the best stress response, with the best ability to make lots of adrenaline, those people lived, which was perfect when there were tigers and mastodons and all kinds of predators around us. Now, the worst predator we have is our own thoughts. Now I go back home. The pit bull event is 5 hours old. I didn't get injured, nothing bad happened. And now I'm telling this story to my child, and I'm getting upset. I can feel my heart racing faster as I think about the pit bull. My face is flushing. I'm having the same stress response in response to my own thinking and emotion as I had to the pit bull. If we do that over and over and over again, if we retell the sad, tragic story of our past, if we stay stuck in our childhood traumas, in the unresolved issues of our past, if we remain there over and over and over again, it has a terrible effect on our bodies. When we say thought or emotion, we think of something insubstantial, intangible, and yet our thoughts and emotions are driving changes in our bodies, changes in the world around us every single moment, every single thought. The way I would conceptualize it is that thoughts are transient, but beliefs are long-term. And a belief is a pattern of thought. So you might have a fleeting thought, but if you think that thought over and over and over again, just say, for example, a thought of self-criticism, or something you don't like about the world, or blame you have towards somebody else, or a big system like a government or a corporation. All of those thoughts, if you hold them consistently, can solidify into fixed beliefs and a worldview. And so, for example, you might initially have the sense of things not being good in your life, you may have adverse experiences, and then that may develop into a belief that the world is an unsafe place. Now you're driving high cortisol, high adrenaline, you're triggering gene expression and a whole cascade of biological events with that belief. If you then add emotion and believe that strongly, where you're passionate about your belief, now you're adding fuel to the fire, and that's where you see a big increase in gene expression, big increase in those stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol, and emotion is adding fuel to that process. If you think that thought persistently, day after day after day, if it's a belief, becomes a worldview, and you have emotion with it, now you're raising your cortisol level over and over and over again. So high cortisol over time leads to reduced muscle mass, reduced bone density, increased skin wrinkling, degradation of digestion. All of these things start to be affected negatively by those thoughts held for a long time. People under high stress have high cortisol. Eventually, cortisol literally begins to calcify the memory and learning centers in your brain. Your hippocampus can get calcium deposits on it if you have high cortisol over time. Now, you want calcium in your bones and teeth and places like that. You do not want calcium forming in your hippocampus, your memory and learning center. That's exactly what happens in stress people over time. So now your mind, your consciousness, fueled by emotion, is producing substantial changes in your brain. The software of mind is turning into the hardware of brain. And now you have a different brain affected by stress.
The body itself is energy. And so if you magnify your hand 1,000,000 times or more, eventually you're face to face with an atom, and you realize if you look in the atom, there's really nothing in there, just empty space, right? And some infinitesimally tiny energies that are zipping around at the speed of light. And that's what we are. When you're experiencing emotions, you see, what we believe is that every emotion has its own specific frequency. And if you're feeling an emotion of anger, for example, that's a different frequency or a different vibration than an emotion of sadness, and that's different from frustration. They're all different. But if you're feeling an emotion that's powerful enough, your whole being can take on this vibration. And in those circumstances, what can happen is the energy of that emotion can become just too much for the body to take. And so some of that energy remains behind. There's a process that we go through when we experience emotions. The emotion is generated by the organs and some of the glands. And so in other words, what's generated is the emotional frequency that we perceive as the emotion. The emotion is generated, we feel the emotion, we acknowledge it, and then we allow it to dissipate and move on. And that's the process that we are supposed to go through. If that process is interrupted somewhere, if we either bury that emotion and we don't allow it to surface, or if that emotion is just so big that we can't really deal with it, then the energy of that emotion remains in the body. And so then what happens is it may manifest many, many years down the road as all kinds of different problems. The operative word that we use is discomfort. If you have some kind of discomfort, that's probably emotionally based. Now, discomfort can be physical or mental or emotional.
But if you meditate, if you do EFT tapping, if you spend time in nature, if you're in your heart, if you spend time with loved ones, if you have rich social networks, all of these things go into reverse. Now, you're not making lots of cortisol, you're making lots of DHEA and other positive hormones. And DHEA is also called the euthanasia hormone. So now, with high levels of DHEA, all those aging signs, all those physical things go into reverse. A happy person has high DHEA, high oxytocin. Oxytocin then sparks the production of neurochemicals like anandamide, the bliss molecule, in your brain, like nitric oxide, which makes you alert in your life. All these positive things happen when you are a positive thinker, when you meditate, when you tap, when you do all these practices that center you and give you a positive affect, mood, outlook. So now thought, consciousness, fueled by positive emotion, is becoming vibrant health. And that's the direction you're going to nudge yourself in with every thought. People think their thoughts are innocuous. They think they're insubstantial, but they're affecting your body every single moment. If you knew the harm it did to your body, you would do your utmost to quit that negative thinking immediately.
January 6, 1985, I was home for Christmas break from university. There were two friends from high school. It was Sunday night, and like everybody, we were kids and we were just out having a couple of beers. I remember walking to the car, and the other passenger, Mike, we fought to ride shotgun. I was riding shotgun. I was badass, so I didn't put my seatbelt on. It had just started raining. The first 30 minutes of rain, all the oil comes up. It was the worst conditions possible. There was an interaction between Mike in the back seat and the driver, and something happened where the driver lost control of the car. The driver hit the brakes, went into a skid, and it hit a guardrail. It blew the engine through my seat and out the back of the car. My face was blown off my head and my femur was shattered into 200 pieces. Normally, some of the bone pierces the femoral artery and you bleed out in 50 seconds. The car was on fire. I was in a lot of pain, screaming, "Don't let me die. I don't want to die." A doctor was called in. He was called in to amputate my leg. He said, "I just read this article. A Swiss doctor named Zickel has this contraption. I'm not going to amputate. I'm going to put him in traction and put him back together." I would go out for years after the car accident, and people would say, "Hey, how'd you get that scar on your face?" Or, it'd be like I'd be out at some place, or I'll never forget it. Some woman came up to me at a bar once. She said, "What happened to your face?" And people, and I meet them all the time, people who have facial scars. It's very traumatizing because, that's your facade to the world. You're like, this is your person. And mine it took 5 different surgeries to put it back together so that I have some kind of semblance of like a normal smile. For 25 years, I had this vengeance fantasy of going to find this driver and doing to his face what happened to mine. And I would find myself in the middle of the night sometimes just having these horrible, like the world is unjust and this whole terrible thing. Fred Luskin, who wrote Forgive for Good, he was speaking about these topics. So one night I wrote a letter to the driver of the car and I just put it away. I didn't mean to send it or anything. And then I woke up the next morning and I read it and I was just like, let me check out what's on the internet. So I Googled him, found him on Facebook, and I set up a second Israel account so he would see it's me, but I just didn't, want him to see my whole life or anything. And I sent the letter. I just told him what I'd done for those 25 years and, things I was feeling and whatnot. And I went to work. And I came home. It was probably like 6 o'clock at night. And I was like, okay, let me check this other Facebook account. And lo and behold, I received an equally long letter. And I started to read it, and it was really heartfelt. And it's surprising to everybody when you show up in a certain way. Like, I can't tell you, be vulnerable, right? But if I show up in a certain way, I can inspire you or enroll you. So I don't know how much personal work this person had done over the past 25 years or something, but he showed up like a gentleman. And we went back and forth for a week talking about our lives. And at the end of the week, he had told me how sorry he was. And for some reason, I just felt compelled, and I just wrote in all capitals, "If it helps you in any way, I forgive you." And I deleted the account, and I never had any of those machinations or anything, like all negativity, and that's why I talk about this irony, because your mind was built to create resentments, woulda, coulda, shoulda, didn't. And those are the things that show up as the causes of suffering, because you're trying to change the unchangeable. I can't go back to 1985 and if I did, something worse might have happened, right? But your mind is this incredible machine that looks at the past and says, wow, that was really traumatic. I'm never going to let that happen again. I'm going to lift weights, or I'm going to get rich, or I'll show them. And you do this whole crazy thing. You're only causing your own suffering, because it's like trying to jam a square peg into a round hole. You can't change the past. And yet, if you're out there and you're like, well, I'll show them that they shouldn't have mistreated me because I'll be famous and I'll be rich and I'll do these things, you'll get there, and then you'll realize that those people you don't exist to them. So you've lived your whole life for this inauthentic reason.
As men, especially in the West, we're taught to suppress our emotions. Boys don't cry. Men especially don't cry. We're taught that emotions and showing emotion is a sign of weakness. And so we tend to suppress those emotions. And as a result, women are much more likely to seek help for emotional difficulties, while men are much less likely. And so as a result, men tend to have more problems, more diseases and so on in certain categories. What I have seen personally with emotional baggage is that they seem to be the biggest single underlying cause of depression and anxiety and phobias and panic attacks and PTSD and eating disorders and self-sabotage of all kinds. And they also are the biggest underlying cause of the physical pain that people experience: neck pain, migraine, headaches, low back pain, knee pain, but other problems too. People seek medical help for many other kinds of conditions. And in my experience over the last 30 years, every single one of those conditions, things like infertility and asthma, digestive disorders, and even cancer, all of those diseases, in my experience, always have an underlying emotional component.
I always would say, kind of proudly, I was almost killed in a car accident. So for about 25 years, until I started getting more and more into compassion and Buddhism and things like that. And finally, I took a course, and you had to tell the story of your life. And someone said, like, okay, what happened here? And I said, I was almost killed in a car accident. And there was a gentleman who was tasked with deconstructing the story. And so I said, I was almost killed in a car accident. He goes, no, you weren't. I said, well, actually, my femur was shattered. My face was blown off my head. They didn't notify my parents because they didn't think I was going to live. Trust me, I was almost killed in a car accident. He goes, no, you weren't. We went back and forth. And then finally, he says, there was a car accident. Everything else you added. You can't be almost pregnant. You can't be almost dead. You're either alive or dead. There was a car accident. So language creates reality. The way you choose to frame your life, and you're either the hero of your story or you're the victim. And for those first 25 years, I realized in that instant that I was sucking people into my drama, trying to get them to be empathetic. And I just made a conscious choice, like, no. So when people ask me now, it's like there was a car accident.
When we look at trauma, different traumatic experiences, I like to think of it as an empty cup. So you've got a water glass, and something happens to you when you're 2 years old, and you pour a little bit of water in, and that's a little bit of trauma. And then 5 years and 10 years, and a horrible experience. Eventually, the cup overflows. It's too much for the body to handle. That's why some people can have one traumatic experience, and they can change from it, they can grow from it. There's post-traumatic growth as a thing. And other people, a soldier comes back from war dealing with PTSD, his nervous system, his body, his brain, his spirit is just completely overwhelmed.
There are two kinds of trauma. There's simple trauma and there's complex trauma. And complex trauma is usually developmental trauma. So an example of simple trauma is somebody who's 25 years old, they have a terrible car crash, and they're in hospital for a long time. It takes them a great many months to regain physical function, and this shatters their lives in some fundamental way. That's a simple trauma. A complex trauma is one where there was abuse, often as a child. And if there's developmental trauma, where you were beaten over and over and over again, or where you were being neglected, whether you were being physically assaulted, and it was repeated. And that's a different kind of trauma because the brain is growing while that trauma is happening, and that information is being installed at the level of circuits in your brain. It's not just a thought or a belief or one event. It is crucial, it is fundamental to the actual way your brain wired together. For the first 2 years of life, the fastest growing brain region is the limbic system. So the limbic system, the emotional midbrain, is the fastest growing brain region. It's not a part of the brain that has language, but it feels deeply. And so if you're being traumatized while that part of your brain is growing, then trauma is woven into the neural fabric of the way your brain structure is. And so that kind of trauma is hard to treat. We find in trauma treatment manuals and approaches that simple trauma is relatively easy, but developmental trauma, complex trauma, is hard to treat. So how does that person get through it? And you can't easily get through it using cognitive techniques, using thought or language-based therapies. I can't sit you in a chair and say, you shouldn't feel that way, because it's fundamental to the way your brain functions.
I grew up in a really beautiful family. My parents would hang out with this other couple, and this man I was told to call uncle. We would go over to my uncle's house. They would all have some type of party, like drink a lot of beer, and there were like rowdy nights. And I would be in the back bed and he would come in. It had happened so many times, and then I would fall back asleep. I believe that it was happening before I could even talk. There was a level of unawareness from my parents that it was happening. The very first memory that actually came up for me was kind of the bookend of when it stopped. I must have been 5 years old, and I remember standing up and being like, "You're not coming in anymore." And I was just like wanting to like stop it and really feeling like I've got to stand up for myself. And there were times when I even tried to tell my auntie about it, and he shut me down. I never spoke to anyone about it, and it just got really bottled down more and more. Obviously, that's overwhelming for a child, so you block it out and you numb it and you forget about it. 15 years passed, and when I hit my late teens, early 20s, I went into drugs, a lot of escapism, didn't want to be with my thoughts, didn't want to be with my emotions, and really run my body down. I was having anxiety attacks. I was really overwhelmed, and it got to a peak time where I started actually smashing the window above my bed to try to escape in the middle of the night, thinking that there was an intruder coming in. It was like, what is going on in my subconscious? I didn't start uncovering my trauma until I was probably 19 years old, after being on like a massive level of escapism on drugs. So at that point, not only did I have to clear the trauma, but I had to clear all of the drug abuse that was on top of the trauma. So I went into so many modalities to take care of my physical body, such as juicing and cleansing. And then obviously when you do that, more emotions come up. So I discovered meditation, yoga, I became a Reiki practitioner, I studied energy healing. I pretty much read every book that I could find. All of these methods allowed me to drop in and recognize who I was and to let go of the story that was controlling me. And when you have a lot of health issues that are caused by drugs, that's affecting your psychology, that's making you feel sick, there's like detox going on, and it's very easy for the mind to identify with that and say, oh, that's who I am. I feel like that earlier time in my life, yes, any escapism is seeking to find love. It's seeking to have that connection. It's seeking to feel held and embraced. And so it does give you that. And so that's the beautiful part about it. But in that time in my life, I was getting those feelings, but I also wasn't doing the inner work with them. I was combining it with alcohol and smoking, and my mindset wasn't about looking within. It was about partying and not thinking about it. And it was a hard process to go through to even recognize, like, oh, did this really happen? Like, I haven't remembered this, and now all of a sudden. but I could feel it being released in my body, and the intense emotion that was coming out of me when I was healing. I was like, you can't make this up. And I think that's what happens to a lot of people who have blocked out trauma, especially sexual abuse, because I work with a lot of women, even men who have had sexual abuse earlier on and they've numbed it out. Oftentimes they doubt that, they think they're making it up, or how could this be true? But if there's emotion running through your system while you're processing it, you know there's something there.
When something happens to you and you feel an emotion coming up, that's really a message from your deep subconscious. Now, that message that's coming up is happening not only because of what's going on in the moment, but it's also coming up because of past experience. This phenomenon of trapped emotions is really universal. If you're having any kind of discomfort, that's a sign of emotional baggage. If you're having physical discomfort in some way, there's something that doesn't feel right in your body, 99 times out of 100, there will be some emotional baggage there. If you're feeling some kind of emotional or mental discomfort in some way, if your life isn't working like it should, if you keep picking the wrong kind of person as a mate over and over and you can't figure out why, if you tend to feel certain emotions that you don't really understand, you're not sure where they're coming from, if some things easily trigger you, okay, and you can become upset at the drop of a hat, or you find yourself crying for no reason, or if you are not able to keep enough money in your bank account, or if you just can't seem to find love and you're alone, those are all signs of emotional baggage.
I started working on the core piece, which was like, why am I getting up in the middle of the night and smashing a window, and all the trauma and fear that's running through my body when that's taking place. And as I started to use tapping on it, the memories started to come. And it was the very first time I actually got my memory back around what happened. And probably for about 6 months, I did continual work on that and pulled out so many layers, and more memories kept unfolding, and more love was brought to those memories, and all of the fear that was trapped in my system started to dissolve, and those reactions that I would have in the middle of the night stopped, and I became more peaceful inside.
There's so much anger and judgment present when the trauma has not been addressed. So they're not ready to even entertain the idea of why their father did what they did or their mother did what they did. But when they can start to heal the trauma within themselves, separated from the individual, and they can start, moving through some of the stories, they can start integrating the rest of us and living with it and seeing that there is an upside. I mean, that is a very, 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 very sensitive subject when you present the idea that perhaps some goodness came from the trauma that you've experienced. And people have to be ready to hear that and ready to receive that. And when they can, then they're open. When they start to see there's something good in this, there's a learning in this, there's an awareness in this, then they're ready to go back to the father they haven't spoken in 10 years, the mother they have ostracized out of their life, and even the ones that have passed away, and to create healing there.
When you take that power back, and when you say, I can let go of that thing that happened 10 years ago. And that's what's crazy about limiting beliefs, our lives, our body, trauma. We're not walking around with what happened this morning only. We're walking around with what happened yesterday and the day before, and really in the decades since, that have made us the people who we are. This whole mind-body concept, right? It's like, whoa, mind-body, it's so new. But it's pretty ridiculous if you think about it, right? That we have cut off ourselves at the head, and we're like, okay, there's the head, the things that we think about, and then there's the body.
Well, if you think about it, we have this conscious mind, which is where we spend all of our waking hours. The subconscious mind is the other part of us, this vastly intelligent part of us that is so smart that it can take the sandwich you had for lunch and can convert some of that over into new cardiac muscle tissue or new nerve cells. I mean, it's a level of intelligence beyond our ability to really comprehend at this point where we are. So the conscious mind is a tiny, tiny part of your total intelligence. Now, they say that a single cell in the body is equivalent in complexity to a full-size aircraft carrier with thousands of people working on board at their different jobs, with jets on the ramp with their engines spooled up ready to take off. That's a single cell. And the last estimate was that the average adult has about 137 trillion of those. Let me tell you something. Your subconscious mind is aware of every single one of those. down to the DNA level, down to the quantum level, and so every face you've ever seen in a crowd, everything you've ever eaten or tasted or touched or smelled, the whole history of your health or disease, it's all in there in that subconscious mind. So consciously, we are barely functional, I think. We like to think of ourselves as really smart, but the subconscious mind puts us all to shame because it is so intelligent. Now, the problem is, you see, the conscious mind and the subconscious mind need to agree on certain things. For example, let's say that you would like to become wealthy, all right? Well, that's fine. Consciously, you want to become wealthy. And so you want to move in that direction. But if your subconscious mind has learned from the things that have come in as inputs that it's not okay for you to be wealthy, what will happen is the subconscious mind will prevent that. Or you may become wealthy and then lose that wealth and have to regain it over and over. And this applies to everything. We actually had this case once where there was a woman who was trying to lose weight. She was very overweight. And what had happened was, we finally were able to understand, was that she had seen what happened with her mother. Her mother, when she was a child, was overweight, went on a diet, lost the weight, promptly had an affair, and destroyed the family, ended up in divorce, terribly painful. So here's this child now who's in her 40s and 50s, trying to lose weight and can't, because the subconscious mind has this idea that if we lose weight, we'll have an affair and our marriage will end, and that'll be the end of it. And so she was never able to get to that point, you see. And so that emotional baggage will run us.
There's a very famous study called the ACE study, Adverse Childhood Experiences. Massive number of people looking at what happened in childhood. And there's an ACE score, so you can go through different traumatic experiences and you add them up. And for the people who have the highest traumatic experiences score, they get one score. And if not many things happen to you in childhood, you get another score. Now, here's what's crazy about this study in particular, and it's been repeated since then. Smoking, cancer, addiction, directly correlated with adverse childhood experiences. So you think to yourself, what is cancer? Something happened to you in childhood and now you're more likely, it's not like the only determinant, but you're more likely to get cancer statistically because of these experiences. And I think what's happening in the body, when we think about especially those tough experiences, the environment is unsafe. I think about the word safety. I use it a lot in tapping, even though I don't feel safe. And most people don't think about that. They don't walk around going, do I feel safe or not? But if I ask people, especially who've been traumatized in deep ways, do you feel safe in your body? The answer, no. When they tune in, they go, and you can do it at home right now. You can close your eyes and go, do I feel safe in my body? And what that's going to open you up to is, what are the parts of you that have been running with that traumatic event, that have felt anxious, that have gripped tight, right? Because this is what happens when trauma is created, the body goes, ugh, and all too often it doesn't let go. And I tell people, if we think about that holding on tight, if I close my fist right now and I say, okay, I'm going to squeeze it for 5 minutes, right? 5 minutes later, this is going to start to hurt. And if I go, well, you know what? I'm going to squeeze it for 2 hours. Now, this is getting uncomfortable. And it's going to be really uncomfortable when I open it. Now, imagine squeezing like this for a decade. What would happen? I wouldn't be able to open my hand, right? It would probably get all crippled. Blood flow would be affected. The growth would be affected. If this happened when I was young, who knows how the fingers actually grow? Maybe they stop growing because they're stuck in this place. I think that's what happens to us emotionally when we have these traumatic experiences. We're holding on so tight. We're walking around with this belief about the world that you got to keep gripping. You got to stay safe. You can't be open and vulnerable. And that affects the rest of our lives. So then when you talked about finding in our 20s, 30s, 40s, whenever it is, finding that we've been gripping like this, it's a little uncomfortable to begin to open that up. It can feel unsafe. It can be painful. Go, I don't want to look there. Which is why it's great to have every tool at your disposal, tapping, the right practitioner, the right therapist, especially if it's that deep traumatic stuff, all these new tools and techniques to begin to unfold that, to begin to open up that hand, to allow the body to feel that it's safe.
Now, when you're trapped in a negative belief and you're trying to build positive neural capacity and new beliefs, it's hard because your brain is used to functioning in those ways. We know from the work of Nobel Prize-winning Professor Eric Kandel that if you pass a signal through a neural bundle repeatedly for an hour, the number of synapses can double. The amount of signaling hardware can double in 1 hour. And so what if you've been passing angry thoughts and resentful thoughts or guilty thoughts or shameful thoughts through those circuits for years and years and years? You now have massive neural bundles dedicated to sending those signals. And now you think, gee, I'm a miserable person. I'm horrible to my kids. I'm miserable in my job. I keep on having financial disasters. I'll go take a weekend workshop at the Dawson Church, Deepak Chopra or someone like that. And so they go to a Tony Robbins workshop or Joe Dispenza workshop or Marianne Williamson workshop, and now you feel great after the workshop. You're in this temporary state of euphoria. You feel so good. But then Monday morning, you're back in your regular life with all the stimuli that trigger the firing of those neural bundles, which you've been building for the last 30 years, and you revert right back to the way you are. So that's the challenge of personal growth. We have to build that signaling capacity. We have to build that belief. We have to build those positive circuits even before we have the experience of them.
People only know what they know. So if you're born into a family that doesn't love, then that's what you think love is. And so you look for that because it's comfortable and it's what you know. You don't even know that a whole new level of love is available out there. And so you attract people based on what you expect and what you grew up with a lot of the time. It's often very hard for someone that grew up with punishment or abuse to even recognize that there's something better out there. They may on the surface know, but on a subconscious level, as a child, especially between the ages of 0 and 7, you're looking at your reality, you're looking at your parents, the people that taught you as gospel. And that sets up the pathways to this is what reality is and this is what you should expect and this is normal. And later on, you still have those patterns. So you're looking for that, you attract that. And then things get really hectic and you might say, wow, this isn't really helping me, but I keep attracting these types of people into my life. And then hopefully you have some type of support around you that can help guide you to understand that there's so much more out there, so much more available, so much more love and caringness that can come into your life, even though you've never experienced it.
Some people love yoga. Some people prefer Qigong or Tai Chi. Some might prefer martial arts or dance. So same thing with therapies. Some people respond really well to cognitive therapies, others energy therapies, others hypnotherapy. So you want to play around with this whole beautiful bundle of possibilities and then find the one that works for you. Like someone said to me once, tell me, Dawson, you've done all this research, you looked at all these different therapies, which is the best therapy? I said, okay, I'll tell you the best therapy. The best therapy is the one that works for you. Another time someone said to me, what's the very best form of meditation? I said, the best form of meditation is the one you'll do every day. So play around in all these different techniques and then pick the one that resonates with your energy system, with your psyche, with your history, with your body.
My beautiful 90-year-old psychologist and the best teacher I've ever had when I've been going through the toughest times said to me, you have to feel it to heal it. And I think there's real mastery in that, in honouring the feeling of the pain rather than covering it with drugs or alcohol or behaviour that may not serve you or that you may regret. Is really important to acknowledge that feeling it is actually a fast-track way to get through it. Don't hide from it. Find a way to work through it and acknowledge that sometimes it's so bad you got nothing but tears.
The amount of energy it takes to hide and to suppress any type of trauma is staggering. And we're living with it every single day that we don't even know. And I believe that the cost, the short-term discomfort, if you want to call it that, of addressing a trauma such as sexual abuse, physical abuse, mental abuse, that you experienced as a child, the short-term discomfort is not even, it's the tip of the iceberg when it comes to living with that every single day. Because again, your soul is depressed. your spirit is squashed. You don't get to amplify, you don't get to show up, you don't get to share all of who you are. And if you think for a moment that by me hiding my trauma, by me not talking about it, I'm protecting everybody else. You're living in a cloud. You're living on Mars because your kids are feeling it energetically every single day. They're not sitting there going, why is mum not as alive as my friend Albert's mum? Where's the spark in her face? By holding on to trauma, you're passing it on to the next generation, energetically, spiritually. And I know you think you're doing a good job suppressing it, but you're not. You're doing a shitty job suppressing it because it's taking way too much energy. And that energy could be expelled in so many other ways. Because when you hide your negative emotion, you hide trauma, you hide your gift in there with it. You put it in a box and you lock it away. And I believe our greatest gift lies right next to our deepest wounds.
On December 14th, 2012, that day started out like any other. Getting the boys ready for school, and I was getting ready for work. I remember walking Jesse out to meet his dad. I remember turning around and giving Jesse a hug. I noticed that he had written in the frost with his little fingernail, "I love you." That happened to be his last picture and also my goodbye message. I left for work about 45 minutes away. Shortly after I arrived at work, people started coming up to my desk and telling me that there had been a shooting.
We do have the breaking news of a shooting at an elementary school in Newtown, Connecticut.
Okay, these units in the pool, I got bodies here.
An angry young man shot his way through the glass doors of Sandy Hook Elementary and proceeded to gun down 20 first graders in 2 first grade classrooms and 6 teachers and administrators in one of the worst mass shootings in U.S. history.
I heard that children were taken out bloody. I'm very scared, worried about my son, worried about the other kids that I know here.
It was terrifying. I'm still terrified. I think I'm still in shock about it all. I still don't know everything that happened.
It's a very, very difficult scene for the family members, for all the responding first responders. It's a tragedy. It's a tragic scene.
My son, Jesse Lewis, attended that school and was in one of those classrooms. All the children had been evacuated and that the parents were supposed to meet up with them at the firehouse. So I drove the 45 minutes with my phone dinging, ringing. I really got concerned, really concerned. I was looking for my little brown-headed boy and not finding him. Neil, his father, is looking and we're texting back and forth. Have you checked here? Have you checked there? We couldn't find him. And finally, Neil left to go check the hospitals because all of the lines were busy. And I finally went into that back room. I put his name down on a long list at the very bottom. And I remember, I didn't think ever in a million years that all those people were dead.
Once the information was in, it was clear to me that I had to do something. I am in town. This is 10 minutes from my house. I know this technique that can help mitigate some of the trauma, that can help people heal. Looking around, knowing that tapping is a great technique for trauma, I was compelled to help. My brother, Alex, and my sister, Jessica, and I, and the rest of the family formed the Tapping Solution Foundation. right then for that specific purpose of helping and healing. We flew in Dr. Lori Layden from California, who had had a lot of experience working in Rwanda with genocide survivors, working on trauma and tapping with them. And she ended up moving to Connecticut, spent the next couple of years supported by the foundation in town, working with people again and again and again. And we collaboratively did that. We worked together, ran workshops, worked with people individually. Some amazing stories of healing and transformation. Scarlett Lewis, who has since become a dear friend. Rainy, foggy Tuesday night, so the shooting was on Friday. But I remember walking into Scarlett's house. Scarlett was there, her remaining son JT, who was 12 or 13 at the time, and she was, to traumatize is not, doesn't describe the state that she was in.
I felt like I was attached to the shooter with an umbilical cord, and it ran out of my side and into his, and all of my personal power drained out of me in the form of anger through this cord and into the shooter.
She had heard about tapping and had done some Tapping World Summits, but hadn't gone deep. And that night, we tapped together. Now, people often ask about these situations like, well, this happened on Friday, and what did you do on Tuesday? Like, how are you going to tap this away? Because we always think, oh, tap away the anxiety, tap away the anger. We didn't tap anything away. In that moment, I just looked to bring her some peace and to bring her body into a state of calm. And what was interesting about that experience is we actually tapped on something else completely different. It wasn't like on a Tuesday after her 6-year-old son dies on Friday, I'm going to say, let's tap on even though Jesse died. We tapped on anger and frustration, other things that were going on in her life that were then feeding into the stress and the anxiety. So my job in that moment was, what can I do to just bring a semblance of peace to this suffering individual?
EFT stands for Emotional Freedom Techniques. It's also called tapping. It has you think about something that bothers you. Now, when you think about a thing that bothers you, you're activating all the circuits in your brain that carry that information. So you then have your brain working in a certain way. You have certain circuits lit up. If you think about things that bother you over and over and over again, you make those circuits bigger and bigger and bigger. But if you interrupt that pattern with something else, then you are able to break that signaling, and then your brain no longer uses that circuit. And the something else, in the case of EFT, is acupressure. There are over 300 meridian points on the body. They're organized into 14 meridian lines. And EFT has you apply acupressure in the form of fingertip tapping, like this, to about 13 of those points. There's 7 in the brief form of EFT and 13 in the long form of EFT, as well as using eye movements. And what we see in people's EEGs and MRIs when they do this is that you first have them think about the problem. When they think about the problem, about the event in their life, about the bomb blast, about the car crash, about the terrible divorce, whatever it might be, you find the emotional brain is all lit up. In an MRI or in an EEG, you see all this activity in the emotional midbrain. When people start tapping, it sends a second signal to the brain of safety. Because if you were being chased by a tiger, you would not be tapping. So now, the brain's getting 2 inputs. It's getting this signal from your memory saying, be stressed, danger, 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 danger. And it's getting a second signal, a somatic signal of soothing in the form of tapping. And it prioritizes that soothing signal. Just the way your mom, when you were crying as a baby, she would stroke your face, she would stroke your head, she would touch you. Our emotional midbrains understand touch. When a friend of yours is crying, you don't explain to them why they shouldn't feel so bad. You put your arm around them, and touch will soothe them. There was a famous psychiatrist called Joseph Walpe. After World War II, he was working with veterans of World War II, and these men, for the most part, had shell shock. They were dreadfully affected by the war, and he was a good Freudian therapist, so he laid them on a couch to do the talking cure and said, tell me about Omaha Beach. And he came to the realization after doing this with those soldiers, he said, that kind of therapy is not ineffective. It's harmful. And later term is re-traumatizing. To remember the bad stuff, to remember the pit bull attack, remember the car accident, remember your buddies being blown to bits on the beach. By replaying that in your mind, that thought, now stimulating that emotion is actually re-traumatizing you. And as you fire those neural circuits in your brain, they wire together bigger and bigger and bigger. So we find, for example, that stress circuits like the amygdala grow in people who've been traumatized in that way, and learning and memory circuits like those of the hippocampus actually shrink over time. So we're doing brain remodeling with our thoughts. Our thoughts aren't just producing some kind of emotion or experience in our minds. They're producing neural tissue in our brains. And if you start to use that neural tissue over and over again, then it becomes hard to change. So you can't use cognitive techniques for developmental trauma or pre-verbal trauma. You need energy techniques. And we have huge numbers of them. We have acupuncture, which affects the flows of energy in the body's meridians. We have acupressure, like EFT, where you interrupt that thought and that experience with pressure or tapping on a point. We have energy medicine, energy psychology techniques, and these work below the level of thought. They work at the level of the body's energy system. What we see, for example, on MRI or EEG scans is massive shifts in the body's usage of energy. As you shift the energy of the body, then the form of the body shifts as well.
Walking back out through the kitchen and out through the front door, when I noticed on our kitchen chalkboard that Jesse had written a message sometime shortly before he died. He wrote 3 words: nurturing, healing, love. And I knew that I would be spending the rest of my life spreading this message of nurturing, healing, love.
She has also locked into a bigger mission. I mean, that's what's really exciting about the work that she's doing, is that she's creating meaning behind that.
Afterwards, JT and I started making our own gratitude list and realizing that we really did have a lot to be grateful for. We both talked about the importance of forgiving. Forgiveness for me was a big set of scissors. I cut that cord that attached me to pain. And literally, almost immediately, all my personal power flowed back into me. And it was such a relief.
It's true for her. Like, the way she speaks of it, it is true forgiveness. Like, she forgave the man who murdered her 6-year-old son in cold blood, along with 19 other children. And she didn't just say, I forgive him. She did it. You know, there's that essence of forgiveness in a way that is hard to fathom.
Jesse had really guided my direction following the shooting with his chalkboard message. And I also knew that if Adam Lanza had been able to give and receive nurturing, healing love, that the tragedy would never have happened. Because I knew that somebody who could have done something so horrible must have been in a tremendous amount of pain.
His Holiness the Dalai Lama, people say, who's your greatest teacher? And as the spokesperson for Buddhism in the West, the answer has to be, the Buddha is my greatest teacher. And what does he say? The Chinese, who bludgeoned with axe handles 2 million of his followers, right? And that's his greatest teacher. So for me, owning your life means reframing it to say, okay, I'm here today, I'm safe. Yes, I had this kind of relationship with my parents or this person, or this was humiliating. But instead of fighting reality, a reality that you can't change, the sooner you own it is the sooner you'll let go of all those resentments. And those resentments are now the adage from the 12-step program. Resentment is like poking yourself in the eye and waiting for your parents to go blind. You're only poisoning yourself. So you have to forgive all these people.
Forgiveness is critically important, and we often forget about forgiveness, but I think that you can't really have peace in your life if there's someone that you have not forgiven, because it creates an energy blockage, you see. And so energy can't flow if you're stopping that forgiveness. Now, it may be that you need to forgive yourself for something. I mean, we all do stupid things, but forgiveness is possible. And one of the things we found is that sometimes people who cannot forgive someone who's really wronged them find that when they remove the emotional baggage around the event or around the person, they are able to move to that point where they can forgive and move on.
Forgiveness is a wonderful gift to give to somebody else. But forgiveness is probably one of the greatest gifts you can give to yourself. If you're holding a grudge to somebody else, you're paying the price every single day.
The other thing you need to realize is that you have emotional baggage. Sorry, but you do. And so you need to start getting rid of that baggage.
One of the studies in my book, Mind to Matter, compares the lifespan of optimists versus pessimists. People who have a cheery and positive frame for their lives. They had all the same problems as other people. They may have been fired from a job, they may have had a financial crash, but they have an optimistic take on the world. It compares their lifespan to pessimists. And the difference in lifespan is 8 years. Those optimists live 8 years longer than pessimists. And those aren't 8 years spent on a respirator in a nursing home. Those are 8 healthy years as well.
It's also important to realize that our emotions that come up for us are messengers from the subconscious, but that we also have the opportunity to experience whatever's coming up, but then change that into a different emotion, a positive emotion. And then there's a whole palette of positive emotions that we can choose from.
Personal growth and psychology have been making a fundamental error for a century, and that is we measure how sick people are. So if I go into a psychologist with anxiety, they'll measure my anxiety level. And if my treatment's successful, I'll have 0 anxiety at the end of it. So we're measuring depression, anxiety, and pain, and the goal is 0. But we don't want 0. We don't want to just have no pain and no anxiety, no depression. We want to have vibrant health. We want ecstasy every day. The new science of personal growth, the new human potential, is what's above 0, and how high above 0 can we go? And the answer is way above 0. We can achieve ecstatic states in meditation and by tapping and reducing our stress. So ask yourself this question. Who would you be if you didn't have your old story? If you were free of all the things that hold you back? You could soar. There's evidence showing that we human beings have remarkable capacities, and we're just beginning to exercise them.
I always say, moment by moment, breath by breath, day by day, I've got this. And even in the moments I haven't, I will then remind myself I just got through that moment. So in fact, I have. I'm still here. You are still here. You have got through the worst moments in your life. You're still here. Therefore, in hindsight, when we look back at those times that have been really challenging, I would almost suggest that anything that's been challenging to you in your life that you look back on, when you look back on it with hindsight, you could almost say, yes, it was a gift, or it is because of that I have actually created this in my life, or I've become that, or I have met this person, or I have studied that. There is a gift in every challenge. It's just whether or not we're willing to be open to having perception that we deserve the truth and the pathway to finding that new way of being. I can tell you, it is through the powerful mastery of our spiritual leaders that they will also say that that is part of the pathway. Struggle is the pathway to self, to God, to universe, to source.